When you don't have an established relationship with an artist or a label, how do you go about negotiating with them to convince them to give you their multi-tracks?
Cool. That is a good question, and it's a very good question for those that are really trying to get into remixing and they want to remix bigger artists. Often it's really hard to get in contact with the artist, and even harder to get in contact with the label. The first concept I would say is to always try and contact the artist first, and then offer to do a remix on speculation. Meaning, if they like the remix, they can use it. If they don't, you're out of luck. But at least you're given the opportunity for a bigger artist to hear your work. The other thing to keep in mind is that the labels are often the people that actually assign the remix. So as soon as you talk to the artist, because if you have a good relationship with the artist, they'll get you on the release. But after you talk to the artist, you want to talk to the label and offer them to do any remixes on spec for any artist. And if they are willing to do that, then you're in luck. And if you do a good remix and they like it, then it gets signed, and then you get further work with them, and it kind of carries on from there. But the one thing to know is that if there is a released song, 95% of the time, they're not going to want you to remix something that's already been done. It's done, the release is out. Unless they're re-releasing it or releasing like a remix album. For example, that Beck song I played, that Boards of Canada, was part of an entire remix album. So Beck made a single album, and then he had an entire other album of remixes by different artists. But yeah, in general, if the song has already been done, then it's not easy to try and get a remix released of it. So the best bet is to get in contact with an artist and a label before their next release, and then they can give you the parts that way. Good question.
Yeah, when you had the vocals and you reversed them and added the reverb, was that to create an effect, or was that like some technique to just get certain parts of the vocal out?
No, that was definitely more for an effect. I used that to get that certain kind of a sucking texture, right? Because when the reverb precedes, it kind of goes, hey, love's like a drug for me. I'm singing, all right? No. Yes.
Do you find, if you're using like a software synthesizer or a drum machine, is it better to bounce them down to audio and then process them from there? Or is it to get the best sound out of it?
No, that's a good question, and it's a pretty common question. The answer to that is no. I would suggest not bouncing until you completely max out your computer. In which case, for this remix, I did several times, and I did actually have to bounce because, frankly, my computer just was not being able to play the song anymore. And I don't have the best computer, but if you have a nicer computer, you shouldn't have to worry about that unless you're using really intensive plugins.
I was wondering if you could tell us when the next time you're performing is so we can check you out.
Very, very good question. The next time I will be DJing under my left-right alias will be at Meltdown. It's a huge festival this Saturday at the Dallas Convention Center, and we've got a couple other DJs that will be playing. Hunter Vaughn, who actually did a remix of one of my singles, and that's going to be a pretty big show. We got a lot of international talent coming from in there. I would expect at least a few thousand people in attendance for that. Got another question?
Yeah, right here. More of a techie question.
Sure.
Were there any like telltale signs that you have phase cancellation? Like you could be futilely tweaking every EQ you have, but in reality, you got a phase problem. You're never gonna get that oomph.
Yeah, well, phase problems can manifest themselves in very different ways. One thing to know is that phasing is common, basically, as waves go up and down in amplitude. When they combine together, then they sum and they cancel each other out here and there. That is normal to happen. So the vast majority of phasing is not really a problem. But where it really manifests itself often as a problem is if you have the same source file and they're delayed in some way. And that's something that takes training to hear. But really, the biggest problem comes in the lower frequencies when two sounds can phase the low end out, or it'll change the amplitude of the lower frequencies over time. So one of the easiest ways for me to make sure that that's not a problem, at least with my bass lines, is that I will literally high pass or shelf off everything above 100 hertz other than what I want playing in that area. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but there are times when the actual electric bass carries the sub, it carries the low end of the song, and then there are times when I high pass the bass and a synth takes over and it carries the low end of the song. But that's a good mixing technique to prevent phasing problems with bass lines. Phasing problems with drums is something you more kind of have to listen to for the timing. If they're flamming, if they're not hitting right at the same time, then it can kind of cause a blur in that attack and those transients. That's something that just takes time to hear.
This is back to Meltdown. Where would one purchase a ticket for that, and like how much would it cost?
I'm not sure I want to get completely into the specifics of that. I mean, I think the tickets are $25, $30, something like that. It's a big festival, but you can Google Meltdown, and there's also fullaccessdallas.net and meltdowndallas.net, I think, are two places you can get more information on that.
Any other questions? I had a quick question. Just
Sure.
how long did that remix take?
It took a very long time. It's a good question. Over the span of time that it actually took me to do it was probably 1 to 3 months, anywhere in there. But that overall, the actual amount of time I put into it was probably between 40 and 60 hours, just into 6 minutes. 40 to 60 hours into 6 minutes. Yeah. So, and on average, a lot of my remixes are about 40 hours. I have done some in as little as like 3 days, and that was about 20 hours. That was one of the shortest ones I've ever done. And then I've had ones that have gone over 80 hours. And if like film scores and stuff like that take much longer to really get specific with. But I was going to mention one other thing about that. But that's not a very common thing with electronic dance music producers. I know a lot of people that move a lot faster than I do. I tend to be very slow because I'm very picky about all of the details with not just the music, the structure, but also the transitions and then the audio engineering and the mastering. I take care of all of that at once. And previously in the industry, that used to be 10, 15 different people's jobs doing each one of those pieces, and I do it all. So I really like to take my time at each stage in the workflow.
Are you still working in Cubase?
I do use Cubase for a good amount of my production. Another software program I'm using more often is called Ableton Live, which is also really good for live performances. So I can make something in Ableton, and then I can also perform and sample those pieces live and rearrange them on the fly, which is a really great attribute of Ableton.
I looked up on Amazon.com and eBay to see if I could find the book so I could give these people the title. Was I looking at the history of DJing? History of DJ?
Yeah, it's one of those. I'm not sure. It could be either.
I didn't find either one on both of them.
Oh, okay. Well, I can give a look to that, and we can.
Well, what we can do, we are a library, so we'll find it if anybody's interested.
Fair enough.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, let's please give another warm round.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you wanted to close with?
One thing I forgot to mention, probably the most important, is that we're very, very lucky at Collin College that Chris Lund actually teaches for us now, teaches audio engineering courses in the evenings. So if you enjoyed this level of expertise, I think you could get the same thing from a class. I don't often plug the classes, but we have a lot of great courses: music business, songwriting, synthesis and MIDI, and of course our 4 semesters of audio engineering, which Professor Lund actually teaches courses in. So thank you very much for coming out. 40?
Double checking my facts here.
Okay. Okay, thank you again. Okay.